March 11th, 2011, Fukushima, the most powerful earthquake in Japanese history, hits the coast of Japan, triggering a tsunami with catastrophic waves. The tsunami damages a nearby power plant's generators, causing the entire plant to lose power. The loss of the reactor core cooling resulted in 3 nuclear meltdowns, 3 hydrogen explosions, and radioactive contamination. Radioactive water was released into the Pacific Ocean, radiation was released into the atmosphere, forcing the area to be evacuated. The worst incident of its kind since Chernobyl. But did the Japanese government meet this horrendous incident with enough care?
Well, this could be a Chernobyl in the making.
Tonight, nuclear officials there are warning of a possible nuclear reactor meltdown.
Based on information, data they've had for almost a month, why would it take so long to have the data and not be able to tell us how severe this is?
AFP news agency reported Tokyo Electric Power, or TEPCO, the company that operated the plant, did not take precautionary measures in anticipation that a severe accident could be caused by a tsunami such as the one that hit. Neither did the regulatory agencies. The report also accused the company of not incorporating measures against tsunamis. But let's be real. If the Japanese government had required companies like TEPCO to put measures in place, then this disaster wouldn't have struck. But in a hyper-capitalist society like Japan's, the government served in the interests of the companies, not the other way around. Further, the government's nuclear regulatory body did not require TEPCO to take specific measures such as additional construction after they received simulation results from TEPCO in 2008 and early in 2011 regarding the impact of tsunamis on their facilities. TEPCO said there was no way to prevent against an earthquake of this size. Fair enough. But the staff weren't even trained in the case of an emergency, in the case of the reactor shutting down. There was also poor communication between the government and the workers. There were definitely actions TEPCO could have taken, but instead their greed and laziness led to the destruction of Fukushima. Even when the land healed, the lingering reminders remained. Media tends to explore the human experience in all of its facets, even the most taboo, uncomfortable of subjects. Yet, Japanese film avoids Fukushima, which makes sense. The country as a whole has tried to sweep the entire incident under the rug. Farmers reassure visitors that their crops are free from radiation. A reporter visiting the area suffers a nosebleed, and to this day, parts of Fukushima are still closed. But yet the narrative that everything is fine still prevails. Ichi Efu, a graphic memoir of workers involved in the incident, sold 170,000 copies only after 2 months of release. The manga's perspective centers on the author's time spent working to clean up the disaster. A book that focuses not only on the incident the Japanese government tried so hard to forget, but also centers on the people directly affected by the incident. Woo! Shinzo Abe did not like that. The morning magazine that Ichi Efu was published in made sure to keep the manga from being too political, yet other magazines still refused to run ads for it. A lot of people have said that it lacks drama, but I think that just showing life at the plant is scary enough, by showing that this kind of workplace has gone on long enough to be normal. Having somebody collapse is kind of cliche. Kazuto managed to highlight the true horrors of the incident without adding frivolous details. The horrors of going through everyday life in a nuclear wasteland, the horrors of coming to terms with the shady companies who oversaw the plant, that the town you love will never be the same again, and that the people that were supposed to protect you just didn't care enough to. Despite telling such a brave story, the government, the publishers, the editors did everything to suppress the full truth of this story. Time and time again, I see stories just like Ichi Efu, Japanese media that aims to say the things that nobody is willing to say. I know you weebs love Japan. I'm definitely not one of them, but the reality is that Japan is a hyper-capitalist conservative society. Its leaders are right-leaning, workers feel loneliness and despair from being overworked, kind of like another country I know. Overall, it's an American client state. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. I mean, America literally wrote their constitution. Similarly to Korea, another client state, I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Western conservatism has taken over their everyday lives. Japan still maintains some collectivism and social amenities, but truthfully, with how dystopian their society is, it really shouldn't work. So if their society is built on conservatism, then why do we see so much leftist influence in their video games, anime, and movies? It's weird. The truth is, manga was made to be political. I see this rejection of that notion online a lot, especially from a Western audience. The issue I have is that the article addresses that there is a different definition that people are commonly using in this discussion, only to discount it and substitute another. Political being defined as something that we can relate to the real world makes nearly every form of media political. If one were to follow this definition, defining a piece of media as political would be a needless definition. Sorry, calling bullshit on this one, but I guess you're free to believe that anime in general is political based on the few examples mentioned in the article. It terrifies them, but why? In America, we already have this culture of don't talk about politics. Nobody wants to hear that. I remember whenever Trump got elected and we talked about it at school and everyone was like, I wish people would stop talking about it. That really pissed me off. And I wanted to be like, I'm going to talk about it if I want to, but I have social anxiety. And so I didn't say anything. But that class is also full of people who despise that Colin Kaepernick bent the knee for BLM, so I really should have told them about themselves. Couple that culture with this right-leaning nature of America, and you get this society that is terrified to face its cruel reality. Conservatism in itself is based on fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of recognizing the oppressive thumb that is constantly crushing you. It's much easier to lie and continue believing that the country you were born in is beautiful and cares about you, than recognizing the complexity of the systematic failures that keep you in your place. Even if someone in society identifies as a lib or apolitical, there's so much fear associated with the political culture. So we constantly deny its influence at every turn. After all, anime is my escapism, not mind-bending, soul-crushing truths. Manga is believed to have originated from emakimono scrolls in the 12th century, but modern manga was shaped during the occupation of the Allies in World War II. The comics that the GIs brought to Japan and American television, especially Disney, greatly influenced the start of modern manga. So it already began during a highly political time with the influence from their literal enemy, which would no doubt influence the stories they would tell next. Before we go any further, I just want to say subscribe. If you already like what you've seen or you like things that I've done in the past, please sub. I'm trying to get to 1,000. I beg of you. Also follow me on Instagram, TikTok. I also have a Patreon where you can get exclusive behind the scenes content. You can see my drafts, like the draft from this video, or my edited video drafts also from this video. You know, go check it out. Or if you just want to support and give me $1 because you just like what I'm doing, that would be much appreciated too. Back to the content. Osamu Tezuka became the blueprint for the rising manga scene. Known as the father of manga, he used the American cartoon style and themes of heroic superheroes to create some of the first classics in the anime scene. Kimba the White Lion, Phoenix, and of course, Astro Boy. A robotic boy created in place of a scientist's dead son.
Soaring high in the skies, he may be small but only in size. Astro Boy, he is brave and gentle and wise.
The mighty Atom, they called him. The anime dove into politics headfirst, tackling pro-environment and anti-war themes. Most of this is woven into the overall story, but one episode made its message very blatant. The Angel of Vietnam aired in 1969 at the height of the Vietnam War. In it, Astro protects a village from American forces. Coming just a year after the My Lai massacre, where hundreds of unarmed civilians were killed by the US military, this episode showed the true horrors of American occupation in Vietnam. Many mangaka would take a similar positions against wars happening all around the planet, but how did this anti-war sentiment arise in Japan? World War II became a pivotal marker mark, I think, for most parts of the world, but especially for Japan. Previous to the war, the Taisho period began Japan's conquest for imperialism. The country had been reopened to trade and immigration for a few decades and felt the constant need to keep up with its competitors. Its empire took hold of northern China, Manchuria, Taiwan, and Korea, where they did terrible things. Japan justified this decision by saying it was necessary, for it prevented foreign states from strangling Japan by blocking its access to raw materials and crucial sea lanes. It's giving paranoid. And what that has to do with forcing Korean women into the comfort service, I'm really not sure. But this context is crucial, as World War II would completely change the empire's stability. As we're all aware, Japan took some very questionable actions during the war. We all know Pearl Harbor, but they also attacked territories of the Allies who weren't doing nothing. They were just like under the Allies' rule. Not to mention the biological warfare and torture they took part in. The Japanese people, after the defeat of the empire, began to develop disdain for militarism. I think the impacts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and how those events only really affected civilians stuck with the public. The terrifying aftermath would lead many mangaka and directors to reflect on the trauma they endured during the war. Akira, a cyberpunk classic from Katsuhiro Otomo, continued the anti-war legacy of Tezuka while reflecting on the aftermath of World War II on modern Japan. The 80s is regarded as Japan's peak. Economically, they were at their height, shifting from a more agricultural-based society to a telecommunications-focused one. Information was the key to wealth and power. Capitalism became king after America's influence on Japan's new start, and while it was regarded as positive, some could see the adverse effects it was having. The bigger picture. The world of Akira is a highly militarized, futuristic city. Gang violence and the biggest gang of them all, the police, have a dangerous hold. In the manga, a driving motivation for the characters is the building of an Olympic stadium by the Japanese government, despite their lack of attention to the growing rate of poverty. Economic inequality, police brutality, profit over people, it's safe to say it's anti-capitalist? I'm assuming the Olympic Stadium is in reference to the 1964 Tokyo and 1972 Sapporo Olympics. It also reminds me of the Globe or whatever it is that they're building in Las Vegas. There was a lot of discourse on Twitter about how useless it was, especially considering how close it is, one of Vegas's poorest neighborhoods. Governments will often disregard helping the underclass, the homeless, the poor, the underlying consequences of letting those issues fester in search of more capital. Both of these cases are tourist attractions that lay sitting and waiting to be played with, like a child's toy, useless and out of style. Attack on Titan references World War II, the far right, and Japan's relationship with Nazi Germany. Anime deals with anti-Semitism and the terror that this era brought through gory violence. It's not really until the anime's 2 final seasons that we see themes of fascism blatantly. Some of the show's main characters are a part of the Eldian race, who are persecuted and forced to live behind the walls in order to escape, an obvious reference to the persecution of the Jews during the Holocaust. Eldians who remained in Marley had to wear armbands with stars and live in the ghettos of Liberio. The Eldians are also the race that can turn into Titans, which I'm about to spoil it, but the main character Eren Yeager learns he's a part of. I don't really know if that's a spoiler though, it's in like the first season. This equating of Jews to the Titans is kind of weird discourse though, because they're these insanely powerful beings that eat people. Like that's kind of weird, but anyways, the people of Eldia are forced to atone for their ancestors brutalizing the world. I think this oppression and brutalization they will be referencing is really just the killing of Jesus, which brought about anti-Semitism, and then for the rest of history, they were blamed for literally everything. It seems as if Eldians have a similar history of being viewed as the ones in control, when in reality, they just want autonomy again. It's a really complicated and interesting analogy that the creator Isayama is making. An article from Medium once again circles back to the Western discourse around anime. The political analysis of Attack on Titan shows we have lost the philosophical art of inductive reasoning. It's just an anime and a manga. It doesn't have to be overanalyzed. But if I'm to be blunt, that's idiotic analysis. To take away from this anime that has such solid political themes that it's just a simple anime, after writing a whole article about how political it is like Wow. There's a lot of question on whether Isayama wrote to be fascist propaganda or anti-fascist, which isn't definitive. I would probably lean towards anti-fascist, but I do see how equating Jews to man-eating monsters and all of the anti-Semitic tropes is, once again, really weird. But ultimately, Eren Yeager is the main character whose entire motive is to regain autonomy for his people. I guess the question is he meant to be viewed as an anti-hero or a hero? That is left up to interpretation. One Piece also dives into Nazi Germany with references in Impelled Down. Entire arc, I believe, takes place in a prison where they torture and gas people, as well as Ivankov transifies one of the soldiers, allowing them to finally be in a body they're happy with. I'm in fact wearing a Luffy costume. Okay, I'm supposed to be Luffy. If you didn't get it already by the hat and the shirt and stuff, I'm supposed to be Luffy. I'm gonna take this off now because it's a bit much. Full Metal Alchemist anticipates the Iraq War with the Ishbalan conflict. I'm sure there are many other animes with anti-war themes as the sentiment lingers within the Japanese people, but these are the ones that stuck out to me. It's obvious that Japan's decisions and associations during World War II remain in the psyche of the public. I would even say more than in American media. We get the occasional movie exploring that era with films like Oppenheimer, but there are so many references to specifically World War II. It's crazy. It makes sense though. That's the origin of the anti-war sentiment, and the Japanese people are still to a certain extent feeling the consequences of that war. Their trauma from that time is still very much alive, even as Japan enters a new era. Capitalism and American occupation influence the fall of the empire, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, economic inequality, neglect of their citizens' well-being. All of this is direct consequence of that time. If a nation never takes steps to heal its wounds, then how could its citizens ever begin to move on? Many mangaka take this frustration in a different direction. Similar to Akira, they take a more F the government approach. Might I even say teeter on the edge of socialism? After all, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And let's be honest, justice is being strangled to death. Morals are an interesting topic, as for the most part, their definition never wavers. However, their importance within society changes. Governments and institutions are aware of the just way to go about things, how to treat other humans or other living beings, etc., but they choose sociopathic practices instead. The ruling class posture as if these systems they've created are there to protect their citizens, when in reality they only exist to uphold their power. I mean, the justice system in America, both on a federal and local level, has a history of not being just, even though it's in the name. When the ones in charge have doled out hundreds of years of calculated propaganda, created systems that work in their interests, all while convincing the poor that they're not worth their humanity and decency, is it even possible to reverse any of that, or is it hopeless? There is plenty of Japanese media that divulges into this conversation, leaning extremely left. Many anime fans will hate this part, but it's only because they're delusional. Oda's One Piece is extremely leftist. Each arc is used as a metaphor for issues within our own world or to reflect on the past. Skypiea is used to talk about indigenous people being removed from their land and fighting for autonomy, or in other words, a land back movement. Fishman Island is an allegory for slavery, and the desert kingdom of Alabasta is about resource deprivation. Every inch of this anime is sprinkled with politics. I think One Piece is probably easier to consume without recognizing any of that, dissimilar to an Attack on Titan, which throws it very clearly in your face. It's hidden behind weird and wacky characters and gumba gumba. You could have definitely watched it without seeing any of that, especially if you're not as well versed in leftist politics. But if you look at the things that influence the creator Oda, it solidifies the underlying messages. It's alluded that Oda is fond of the Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara, as there is a picture of him in his office. This influence connects to Luffy very closely, as he is a revolutionary himself, fighting against unjustifiable governments and killing cops. He's literally a terrorist. which in itself re-examines the political weaponization of the word terrorist, terms that are used against people like Che. When you as the watcher begin to love the anarchist that is Luffy, then how does that reflect how you view his motivations and mission? Che Guevara's influence can also be seen in the video game industry from the infamous Hideo Kojima. The obsession with specifically Che Guevara really needs to be studied, like, where did this come from? Kojima is known for creating Metal Gear Solid, a game that was renowned to many as one of the best. The series has several games attached to it, but one that stands out is Peace Walker. The game features several audio recordings that reference Che Guevara's legacy in a very positive light, as well as the main character, Big Boss, not only being compared to Che, but also William Morton. The conversation around the Cuban Revolution opened up a bigger conversation about imperialism and an overall anti-capitalist stance, which Kojima expressly got fed up with Konami's censorship of. Let's actually examine this relationship to anti-capitalism because it's a uniquely leftist position for these artists to take, especially living in an American client state. What is Japan's relationship to communism? The JCP is actually the oldest political party in the country, despite it struggling to become popular. Its popularity skyrocketed in the 40s with unexpected success in the 1949 election. But Japan said hell no and enacted the Red Purge. The government removed thousands of citizens from their jobs. All were either suspected or proven members of the Communist Party. The Soviet Union urged the JCP to respond violently, but that actually ended up poorly for them and lost them a lot of support. In the 50s, a new president took hold of the party and abandoned the violent tactics for a more cooperative position. They partnered with the Socialist Party to get 10% of progressive politicians in the Diet by 1979. Everything their new leader was doing was working. So where did it all go wrong? The Japan Times remarks the party's failures as appealing too much to the elderly. Not enough of their members and votes are coming from a younger audience, like in the US with the Bernie Sanders type. In essence, they need to be a little bit more ageist, as well as the public disdain for the party nicknamed the JCP allergy. The government's strong ties to Western neoliberalism and the anti-communist propaganda it's put on its citizens has no doubt affected its success. I mean, think about it. We just talked about political repression, the Red Purge. The party was literally growing in popularity, but the government didn't allow their constituents to choose for themselves. They instead persecuted the party and villainized them in the eyes of the public. It was doomed to fail from the start. Democracy is like so dead. Honestly, it was never alive. It's still a mystery as to why these creators lean so far to the left, even more so than the creators from the West, despite being such a dystopian, hyper-capitalist society. I literally searched Hideo Kojima, JCP, Oda socialism, and all I could find were rumors and speculation that they're leftists. There is no definitive tie to a particular party or background that may have influenced this position. It's weird, but great. Not all Japanese media directly explores this, but rather they focus on the moral decisions of humanity. When given unlimited power, will we destroy ourselves or prosper? Most of the time, the answer is pretty depressing, I'm gonna be honest. Death Note seeks to answer that very question. Light Yagami, an ordinary high school boy, possesses a supernatural book that has the power to kill anyone he wants. Light's initial use of the book is justifiable to an extent. He wants to use it for good, to create this crime-free utopia. Slowly but slowly, the waters start to muddy, and he begins to kill thieves and lower-level criminals, and even thinks about executing lazy people because they don't contribute enough to society, which is psychotic. He becomes this really narcissistic, self-righteous character who stops at nothing to create this world he's dreamed up in his head. I don't want to delve into the plot too much, but the police get involved, cults begin to worship him, and eventually the spirit that originally had the Death Note writes his name in it, killing him and ending the madness. Death Note brings up a lot of philosophical questions. A big one is radicalization. Light himself becomes so power-hungry that it destroys his being, but the influence doesn't stop there. Other people begin to worship him, creating a cult around his presence and power even after he's gone. He becomes this psychopathic martyr. The radicalization and God complex that surrounds Light tells us that there's no being, no matter how intelligent or well-intentioned, that should have the power to inflict this kind of violence. Oba, the creator, uses the police as the answer, but if anything, it calls into question whether the police should have the power to inflict that same violence, as they are just normal people, just like Light, which I'm not sure if that was a question he wanted his audience to Answer, probably not. But I guess when you think about it, the police never actually stopped Light. It's a supernatural being that allowed him to have the power in the first place that brought him to his demise. So maybe the only beings that should have the jurisdiction to kill are God, or in Japanese terms, the Shinigami. Another anime in a similar vein to Death Note is Devilman Crybaby, one of the greats, Go Nagai. The anime focuses on Akira, a weakling and a crybaby, who transforms into a devilman after Ryo, his friend, calls upon Amon to possess him. The only way to beat them is to become them. The Netflix adaptation of the original story is extremely dark, probably one of the most disturbing mainstream animes out there. It uses themes of gore, sex, and violence to illustrate the true depravity of humanity. I think the most important part of the story is whenever Japan learns that demons exist. It sends the entire world into hysteria. The streets are desolate and quiet. Vigilantes have formed to protect themselves. If anyone is suspected of being a demon, they are executed on the spot by police. Thousands of innocent people are killed in the process, which Ryo regards as necessary. After all, they are a sacrifice to save others from the demons. Except no one survives. The ones closest to Akira begin to turn on each other. Even the most innocent, well-intentioned people are executed by their friends, almost for fun. Strung up on stakes, the ones that betrayed them parade their bodies around in celebration. It's a traumatizing scene. That shit messed me up. When I recently rewatched it a few months ago, I was like, this is not as good as I remember it. But when I sat at night thinking it through, I recognized how excellent it was. It takes a very depressing stance on humanity, but I honestly think the show is so terrifying because the watcher recognizes deep down that it has some truth. Humanity has proven time and time again that it will slaughter innocents in search of greed, some righteous ideology, or just for entertainment. We are fucked up. The show is so effective because at times it gives you reassurance that maybe love will prevail, like the scene where all the kids come up and hug Akira in his demon form because he's trying to show them that he's there to save them, that he's on their side. But in the end, humanity proves that they are just as terrible as the demons, slaughtering each other aimlessly. Akira is such a beautiful protagonist because he will always stand up for what he believes in. I think most people in his position would have given up when they recognized that there was no one left to fight for, but he continued fighting for what was right up until his death. More on that later. Both of these animes don't necessarily take a traditional political approach, but rather a philosophical one that portrays a different side of humanity, one that isn't as predictable or shallow as the hero always winning. The world is so much more complicated than that. Even if you win, sometimes whatever you had to sacrifice in the process takes something away from your soul, leaves you empty. One doesn't fight to regain what they once had, but rather to change the situation for the better. I honestly love that both of these very popular animes take this cynical approach. It feels as if you're being told a secret, like you're not supposed to know this side of the story, because so much media, even Japanese media, doesn't end this way. Socialism and anti-capitalism, disdain for militarism, what else could the Japanese people possibly have a leftist position on? There's one more thing that has been demonized in the West, something so natural that like penguins partake in: being gay. The East has a more open and interesting history of queerness, especially in comparison to the West. But as we discovered in the past two sections, Western influence ruins everything. Yet there are still plenty of queer characters in anime. How? Japan's current relationship with the LGBTQ community is quite turbulent. There has been recent legislation determining specifically gay couples' rights and which areas are willing to recognize them. Watered down laws that don't actually protect anyone from discrimination, but I guess it's a start to future reform. I mean, this is also the country that just changed their age of consent laws from 13. So it's progress. With Japan falling behind as one of the only OECD nations to not legalize same-sex marriage, the don't ask, don't tell policy, it's clear that Japan is still very conservative. Circling back to Devilman Crybaby, the show encompasses a queer relationship with one of the main characters, Ryo, being canonically not interested in women, at least in the manga. Ryo's love for Akira is fascinating. Throughout the entire show, Ryo is emotionless. He is read as an antisocial, callous person who doesn't even feel bad for a dying cat. However, during that same scene, Akira says, "You're crying too," as he wails, his tears dripping to the floor. Akira has always had the intuition to see others' emotions, even when they may be deeply hidden. Even in that moment, he could see Ryo's true feelings and the deep sadness he's always felt. I think that's in part the reason why Ryo loves him. He's the only one that is willing to look past his coldness and accept him. The two were always in opposition though. Akira was a very optimistic, loving, selfless person, while Ryo was literally Satan. It was never gonna work out. It wasn't until Ryo held Akira's dead body that he recognized how much he truly loved him. Remember, Devilman was created in the 70s. Go was out here making canonically gay characters, or at least asexual characters, in the 70s. That's what I'm saying. Why do mangakas create such progressive characters? Maybe to understand this, we need to understand Japan's history with queerness. Probably the earliest record of queerness in Japan is the samurais. Yes, samurais were extremely gay, and Japan was surprisingly accepting of it. In Buddhism, there is a concept called non-shoku, where a young boy enters a homosexual relationship with an older monk. The samurai adopted this concept and created wakashodu, where a young boy learns martial arts and other skills from an older apprentice. There are several texts in the Edo period, like the Great Mirror of Male Love, that are known for their homoerotic nature. The Edo period also introduced a long history of gender fluidity in Japan, but the influence of Confucian beliefs brought about gender inequality. Actresses weren't allowed to perform in kabuki theater, meaning all the roles were filled by men. These actors were known to keep this attire even outside the theater, socializing as women. Pre-Meiji period, there was a normalized culture of gender and sexual fluidity, one that wasn't stigmatized and didn't force people to hide in the dark with secret communities. If anything, its circumstances encouraged the opposite. It wasn't until the westernization of Japan that this anti-queer sentiment was introduced. Yet the acceptance of queerness from old Japan still flourished within manga. Tezuka, the same author of Astro Boy, was well known for including queer characters in many of his works. In Tezuka's Princess Knight, the main character could be best described as non-binary, identifying with both feminine and masculine qualities. In Cleopatra, Apollodoria is attracted to Cleopatra, and Octavian is attracted to Dionysus. Groups like the Magnificent 24 influenced the yaoi and yuri genres, redefining the shoujo genre, focus on same-sex intimacy in the 60s. More than half a century later, mangaka continue to follow in their lead. Queerness is in so many animes. I'm pretty sure every anime I've watched recently has at least one queer character. Komi Can't Communicate has Najimi, a non-binary character. Tadono recounts that Najimi used to wear male clothes in elementary school, but now in high school, they choose to wear a skirt. The characters within the manga also use both feminine and masculine pronouns when referring to them, as no one is sure what their gender is. Another anime I watched recently called Romantic Killer has a wizard named Riri who switches between genders frequently. The character at one point switches to their masculine self to pursue the main character Anzu, but also pursues them in their feminine form. One Piece has several queer characters. I've already discussed Ivankov, who literally has an HRT power, but in that same arc there is an NB character named Bon Clay. In the Wano arc there is also Kiku and Yamato, who are both trans characters. Dio is canonically bisexual. Sailor, Uranus, and Neptune's love. Queerness is alive and fully embraced by mangaka and their audience, keeping alive Japan's old, more progressive sentiment. When creating the concept for this video essay, I had been watching a lot of anime. Titles like Romantic Killer, Devilman Crybaby, and one of my favorites recently, Komi Can't Communicate. And I saw so many progressive elements peeking through. The self-awareness about the faults of conservative Japan that I didn't notice when I used to watch anime. I started to question, why is anime so much more progressive than the government that represents them? Politicians like Shinzo Abe and even the imperial past that Japan holds onto by recognizing the emperor represent a conservative base that has been in control since the end of World War II. But even through this oppression, its citizens found ways to continue expressing themselves, and that expression surrounds one medium: manga. Manga was not only used to create fantasy worlds you could only dream up, but it was also used as a vehicle to get around restrictions. So while the government may push neoliberalism, plenty of artists and regular people dream up a more progressive future for everyone, which makes me love Japan even more. I'm not a weeb, I swear. It's beautiful to see media that is so far to the left, especially living in a country like America, which doesn't have any movies, games, or TV shows that are anywhere as progressive as a One Piece. Stories like Ichi Efu, stories like the start of boy love comics, Tezuka, they're so inspiring. People who are going to find ways to tell the stories they want no matter how much the government restricts them. People who are gonna represent voices that aren't even considered at the time. In the 60s! That's crazy. Like, I belong in Japan. When looking at the bigger picture, these people's lives have been defined by American foreign policy and the actions that the West takes, which causes them to be more politically aware. You can't afford to be ignorant. When so much of your life is defined by elements out of your control, use anything around you to give you hope. For a lot of the Japanese public, and honestly for a lot of people in America, manga is the answer. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring this topic with me, and remember, manga is political. Bye!